Welcome to Tuesdays with Lloyd. I'm Enya here, your host. It's super exciting to kick off our cyber showcase, a special production under Tuesdays with Lloyd. Over the next days, we'll have 6 condensed and yet highly focused sessions all around the very topic of cyber. From Equifax, Microsoft to Colonial Pipeline, the increasing frequency and severity of cyber attacks remind us the importance of cyber resiliency. It is fair to say that no other class of business have so heavily dominated the risk management landscape, not to mention the news cycle. So this is why we put together a series led by leading experts in cyberspace with the goal to help brokers and clients to better understand the various aspects of cyber and also enable our clients to become more cyber resilient. Kicking off the series today are 2 leaders from the Lloyd's market, Lucy Scott, partner at Lockton, and Jacqui Spencer Sim, head of cyber at Hamilton. And with that, Lucy and Jacqui, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Enya. Good morning or good afternoon. We're here today to talk about perfect submission. I don't want to disappoint you from the start, but unfortunately, a perfect submission doesn't really exist, particularly a class of business as dynamic as cyber. However, what we can speak about is how to be prepared as possible when presenting your cyber risk to underwriters and to provide a little insight into what we're looking for. As with any line of insurance, when a risk is submitted to underwriters, we're looking to see how a client is working to mitigate and what their approach to protecting themselves against these risks are. Underwriters are trying to gain an accurate assessment of the risks associated with writing an insurance policy from controllable and uncontrollable factors. This involves extensive study and as much data gathering as possible. It's why transparency shouldn't be a bad word. We need the whole picture, and a submission should never be completed by just one department. The better an underwriter understands a client, the better they can anticipate the likelihood of a claim and the more appropriate the rating of the risk. Lucy, thinking about what I've just said, what steps do you take to help onboard a client? How do you build their story?
So to start with, it's a fairly laborious task. Unfortunately, the application forms have to be completed first. The written submission has become increasingly important with the market and the claims environment that we're dealing with. Before we can even approach insurers on our clients' behalf, we have to have those proposal forms. And as you said, Jacqui, these go out to many different parts of the business. It's a very difficult task to get them completed, particularly now that it's multiple forms and different supplemental forms being added as we go through the process. But what it enables us to do is to actually first and foremost have a good understanding of our client's risk, or at least a brief understanding from a proposal form basis of where those risks might be, and give advice and prepare to approach the market on their behalf. But really now there's a second phase to that before we actually even take the submission to our insurers and underwriters. And that's a kind of almost pre-underwriting phase, because there is so much back and forth once we engage with yourselves, Jacqui, and we really need to prepare our clients for that. So it's no longer as simple as just completing the proposal form and then sending it over for you to have a look at, and then some kind of negotiation begins. We're really having to work through with our clients before that to identify what might be the areas of concern or particular interest for underwriters, and those are changing almost on a weekly basis now, and delve into with our clients where there may be weaknesses or perceived weaknesses or areas of less maturity, and actually kind of build a narrative around that. So rather than coming to you with just a load of no's, actually preempting that might be a concern and helping the client to tell a bit of a story around that. So if it's a no, why is it a no? Or if it's not a yes all of the time, when is it not a yes, and what are the mitigating controls? Is there a project in place to improve that situation, or do you not feel that it needs improving because actually in reality the risk is something different to what the underwriter might understand on the face of it, because obviously you're not in the organisation, don't understand the business in as much detail. So it's really a kind of pre-underwriting, coaching into creating a story for the underwriters, rather than just giving you some tick box answers which probably don't really give you much context. So I guess at that point, Jackie, I mean, we can only do so much as brokers to support our clients in that, and we can't always fully anticipate what your questions might be and what might be your main concerns. So how do you feel it's best for us to then approach the presentation to market, and what's the best way to format that?
Yeah, I think you're right, Lucy. It's you can't really anticipate what an underwriter is going to ask. In addition, you can sit with your client I would probably recommend roughly about 4 months engaging with a broker before you come to market with your submission. But as I mentioned earlier, cyber is a dynamic risk, and the submission needs to remain as fluid as possible. From when the onboarding process starts with you guys, there could be a number of new vulnerabilities or exposures that have been introduced, and underwriters kind of need to understand that the client is aware and that they've remediated where necessary. And I think, like, thinking of the ideal way to present, as you said, it starts with the proposal of insurance, be this risk assessment, application form, or even an exchange of questions via email. But like you said, one of the things you have to remember, this only forms the basis of the submission. We need to still get that clear picture of the makeup of the company, from the architecture to the tangible and intangible assets. We need to understand that a client understands their risk, their client, their company. And unfortunately, at the moment, the proposal isn't sufficient enough to paint that picture clearly. And obviously, the more complex a company is, the more questions that will be asked, and most likely a meeting will still be required. I think people need to understand, remember, or also realize that what the exposure is today isn't what it's going to be tomorrow. And I think when you're looking at trying to help your client to prepare themselves, they need to be, I think I did say earlier, and I say it a lot, that it's trying to be as transparent as you can. Like, we're not there to kind of point out the weaknesses of a client. We're here to kind of help try and analyze that client so that we can help mitigate that risk in an appropriate way. And that's when we're doing all this data gathering, we're still analyzing the client. And there are various different things that people do depending on where you work and what type of company you are. But we just need to understand that you understand your exposure, your assets, and we need to get a clearer picture of what you're doing to kind of anticipate what's coming next. And I think, like, just as we as this process goes on, like I said, talking to your broker 4 months in advance may still not be enough. It could be approaching what you would anticipate is a really good story to tell. But if something's popped up and it's shown a weakness, or there's something that a project that's not quite in place, we need to kind of be able to be assured that as that transfer of risk is coming over to us, that the client and us are as in the best position as we can be. And I think maybe, Lucy, like, kind of picking up on what we've just said, I mean, I could literally go on all day about what we see in the submission, from like the government to employee training, multi-factor use, offline backups. Obviously, let's not forget the supplemental questions around ransom approaches and all the other bits and pieces that are popping up, and known, unknown vulnerabilities, systemic risk, etc. But it is a long process. And do you think there's anything that we could be doing as like brokers and underwriters, maybe to enable clients to get that perfect, as close to a perfect permission as possible in this digital age? It's still quite archaic, the way that we do that. And you mentioned earlier, unfortunately, it still starts with a written proposal. So I just, how would you, is there any suggestions that you think that what we can be doing to get this better?
Yeah, definitely. Look, I think we can all agree that the process that we have right now is not ideal, and it's certainly not helping clients to create a perfect submission, because we've all had to react to a very quickly evolving claims environment. Application forms are static. They take time to update. They take time to go through marketing teams and get back out to the clients again. And the risk doesn't take time to evolve. As we know, it's rapidly changing all of the time. So this kind of traditional static approach to gathering submission information and presenting it in writing to insurers is creating this long drawn out process with multiple forms and then back and forth on those forms, and then misinterpretation between the client and the under about what something might mean and what that actually means in reality, and is that a risk that's being perceived in the right way. And it does lead to a long drawn out process, and ultimately leaves us all working really hard, as we know, just before renewal dates to get everything done in time. So there's definitely a lot that we can do to improve the process. I think nobody's to blame for the position that we're in, other than the fact that the claims environment just evolved so quickly. But I think that there's a big opportunity for us as an industry to put our heads together now and say, okay, how can we improve this process? How can we use technology to better improve the process? I know insurers are investing in this already, so using technology in your underwriting processes, network vulnerability scans, for example, and smart application forms. But I do think it needs a bit more investment now, now that we've kind of come through this phase of having to react quickly. Now we can put our heads together and really say, how can we improve this? Because it's very difficult for a client to get anywhere near to a perfect submission when the process is very difficult. And I know it's a frustration for all of us at the moment. So I know that for all parties, we want to improve this process, make it more dynamic. Do you agree, Jackie? Anything you would add?
Yeah, no, I do. I think I do completely agree. And I think in like this day and age, we see a lot of insurtechs popping up, and we see a lot of clients helping kind of do that, companies do that electronic handshake that can kind of give us that holistic view of a client, which will sometimes take away that question of, I don't know, how many IPs do you have active, and then where's your DNS and all that kind of stuff. But I think you're right. I think there are a lot of insurtechs out there that maybe one day they'll start looking at how to help us create this flow of submissions, and I really think that would be a company worth investing in. I suppose if we draw back, like if you think of what we've said that we need in terms of the proposal of the insurance, be that a application form, a risk assessment, or whatever it may be, I think one of those kind of easy wins is, like you say, putting it online. But then the question there comes as to, as an industry, we should probably kind of come together a bit more to work out what is really required, because one managing agency's requirements could be slightly different to another managing agency's, which obviously helps in terms of keeping insurance dynamic and the kind of different, I wouldn't say competition, but the actual innovation there as to how a managing agent looks at a client different to another one. But there are some fundamentals that we all ask, and we all require those information to be able to put together a proposal of insurance. And I think automating those would be a really good idea. And whether that falls on the broker or the managing agency, I mean, that's as an industry for us to decide. There are some good risk assessments out there, unfortunately, which a lot of our broking partners have put together, but they're all like 40, 50 pages. And that, again, even though that could be online in your ticket, and once you save it as a PDF, you can't view any of the supplemental information that then goes back to questions, and then you still have to do a conference call after. So I think there needs to be something that we need to be able to kind of streamline this process. We always looking at how we can streamline underwriting and how we can kind of do like auto documents and all of this stuff. So I think in terms of, we need to step away from looking at an application form and actually looking at what we require, and maybe that goes down to looking at the individual insuring clauses and working out what's required to get the coverage for that individual insuring clause, and create a proposal of insurance around that.
That kind of feeds into one of the questions that we've had on the chat, actually, Jackie, which is kind of unrelated to this conversation but related to what you just said, is that, do we think ransomware co-insurances are here to stay? And I think that goes to the point that you just made there about making sure that we're asking the right questions to get the clients the right coverage to allow you to be able to offer the full ransomware coverage. We very much need to be asking the right questions, telling you the right story. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a bit difficult. It's also kind of not it's a generalization. Not everyone is offering sublimited co-insurance and stuff like that, full ransom cover. It's a good idea. It leads to questions as to where, like, the language has to be quite strong as to what the intent of the co-insurance is. I think if you think back to when we first started, I suppose when PCI was first introduced into the cyber market, or crime, or even business interruption always had a co-insurance on it until the market softened and more competition came into the market, and people's coverages were getting broader, and so the co-insurance disappeared from business interruption. PCI was always sublimited until people felt there wasn't a true exposure there, and it's kind of an argument as to, oh well, so and so includes it, so you may as well. That's not how underwriters think. If coverage isn't required, it shouldn't be covered, and that's what kind of helps in terms of reducing exposure and premium. I don't think I can't say that co-insurance is going to be here forever in terms of not just ransom, but other coverages as well. It changes as the exposure changes. There are a lot of governments around the world that are doing a lot of good work in terms of trying to shut down the threat actors and kind of help trying to mitigate this ransom whole entire theme. So as that kind of becomes less and less, we've seen that the ransom requests are kind of getting a little bit lower in terms of what's required, and as people are getting a bit more astute in what their protections are, you're seeing that you'll see that another it could be back to, I don't know, to data exfiltration, or who knows, just a normal data breach, and you'll probably see the switch there, that once this kind of claims environment goes, you'll see maybe perhaps that going back to the full limits and stuff like that. It also, if there's a co-insurance, it also makes the client more aware of having a bit more skin in the game. So they're more aware of their exposures. They're looking to mitigate that risk, rather than just saying, oh, well, we've got the insurance, it's covered. Like, it's a huge impact. And ransom, although it's always been around, it's only, people have only, I need to remember, it's only in the last 3 years or so that it's actually become this big inherent problem. So people to be able to react to that, that's one of the reasons that the sublimits are starting to come in. I think it's just one of those things, and people are adapting as we need to. I should see, I think there's another question on there, but I think we've kind of covered that in terms of the submissions, what we're trying to do in terms of being fit for process and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Lucy, I don't know if you have any other closing comments and stuff like that.
No, I don't think so. I think we've covered everything.
Yeah, and I think, as we've said, like, obviously today was just a snapshot of a subject that we can clearly speak on for hours. And please feel free to reach out to Lucy or myself if you'd like to discuss further. This was kind of, as Enya said, it was just a quick snapshot into what we're thinking in terms of the perfect cyber submission. But we do hope it has given you some useful insight into what is expected from a near perfect submission. Please join us again for the same time tomorrow, so as we hear from James Creasy and Sharif Gardner of Access Capital, and they're debating the importance of incident response and crisis management. And joining them will be Stephanie Fisher, Director of Risk Management and Insurance at Qantas Service. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.